All right. Hi, everyone. Joining from, I think, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're coming from. Welcome to our Earth Week live stream with the Earth Journalism Network. Seeing a lot of people join in. Thanks for the thumbs up. Nice to see you all. I'm sure we'll have more people joining us, but we're going to continue on and get started today. So welcome, everyone. This is our Earth Week Ask Me Anything or AMA event. I'm Hannah. I work with EJN. And this event is special. We are joined by an energy expert and 3 journalists who are covering the energy transition. This is going to be a really fun conversation about the role of media in covering energy and electricity, and also how journalists can best cover this important topic. We'll be here for approximately an hour, and we're going to be answering mostly pre-submitted questions that came in through our EJNet Google group. So shout out to all of you who submitted really great questions this time. If you do have any live questions that you would like our experts to answer, you can put them in the comment section of the live stream. We are monitoring that, and if I see some good questions, I'll definitely pose them. And if you want to have a chance to submit questions ahead of time for AMAs like this, which we do roughly every other month, you can join our EJNet group, which is free to join. It's for journalists, editors, others interested in environmental journalism. And you can join on our website, earthjournalism.net. And we're also going to be uploading the recording of this conversation to our YouTube channel. So if you miss any of it, want to rewatch, or can't stay for the whole time, please head over there later today to see the full recording. So we are just going to jump right in with some introductions. We have 4 great panelists here today. I guess we'll start with Dave, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, hi there. Lovely to be here. My name's Dave. I work at a non-profit called Ember, and there's 65 of us working on the global electricity transition across the world. And my job title is Global Electricity Analyst.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Dave. Varsha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Varsha Singh from India. It's a pleasure to be here and share some of the on-ground experiences I have had while reporting on energy transitions. Yeah.
Thank you. And Oz, over to you.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. My name is Oz. I've been a climate and environment editor and journalist from 2015, and looking forward to engaging with everyone.
Thank you. And Matias?
Well, hi everybody. I'm Matias. I'm talking from Argentina. I also cover energy transition and environmental issues here in whole Latin America, but especially in South America. Hope you'll find this so interesting as I do. It's a really interesting topic to talk about. So thank you for inviting me too.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let us get started, and we're going to start with kind of a big question. So, Dave, Ember recently released the Global Electricity Review 2025, which is available in multiple languages. Everyone should go read it, which is about the current state of the energy transition and electricity globally. And I'm curious to hear from you to get us started. What are the biggest stories from this report that you think journalists should be paying attention to?
Yeah, we track electricity data across every country that has electricity data for that we can pull it together for. So we're able to come up with a global way, but underlying that, there's also lots of data within that. So the findings that we came up with are our way of analysing it. But I guess just to mention, it's really relevant for everyone looking on this call, which is that underlying that, we have a big data set of monthly electricity generation that we're updating throughout every month for over 80 countries in the world. So whenever that data from government sources come in, we've got an automatic update pipeline where that comes into our data explorer, and you can we know an awful lot of journalists use that data to create their own stories and write up their own stories directly, as well as other analysts. So I guess that's the way to introduce it at the start. But where our analysis was looking at it, we were looking from a global perspective, and we're tracking that global progress. And we led with a headline that 40% of, for the first time, 40% of the world's electricity came from clean sources. and specifically wind and solar driving most of that share, with 15% of the global electricity generation last year coming from wind and solar alone. The rise in annual rise is really quite strong. So last year, that rise in renewable generation rose by 49% year on year. So really high growth rates as wind and especially solar are deployed at scale. And really for us, we did a big deep dive on solar, because solar is where so much of the action is now. It's been doubling every 3 years. For the last 12 years now. Normally when you have kind of industries growth through, you have that rapid growth at the start, and the percentage growth kind of tails off, but it keeps doubling and doubling and doubling every 3 years. And it's not just in a few countries, it's in every so many countries across the world. So we did this really nice kind of explosion graphic showing the solar rate in across 100 countries, and everywhere you look, there's progress, which is really, really encouraging. It's also helped along by that rise in batteries. One of the big stories that's going on in the global electricity transition is the arrival of battery onto the scene. So, and that's really going to help underpin solar's growth in the future, because it's turning that kind of daytime electricity into across the day, attack 24-hour electricity, as more and more battery gets built into the grid alongside solar, which is quite exciting. We were hoping that 2024 was going to be the year that global emissions from the power sector started falling. And what actually happened was huge heat waves across the world with huge amounts of air conditioning, which resulted in some much higher than normal electricity demand growth last year. If it hadn't been for that, we would have seen falling electricity emissions. And we believe that from next year we'll be returning, well, from this year rather, we'll be returning back to that. And for the first time, we'll kind of be entering into this new world of falling emissions. I guess our conclusion, and when we look at growth and how it's going, it's really good that you're now having all that extra electricity demand being met from renewable generation, that fossil generation isn't falling, and it's going to start, isn't rising, and it's going to start to fall. But what we know about that rise in renewables is that it's not going to be big enough to see the big falls in generation at a global level that we need to see to get anywhere close to 1.5 degrees. So we're sitting in this world at the moment with really good renewables growth, but quite high electricity demand, overall energy demand growth, emissions kind of plateauing and kind of heading towards a new world of slightly falling emissions, where we would really be hoping for much faster falls. But yeah, the main takeaways from the report was really around that 40% rise turning point, around solar really coming into its own, and about that getting closer towards a new world of falling emissions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think there's a lot to pick out there, and a lot of good news, but still more movement needed to really get to where we need to be. So on that, I'd love to hear from the journalists with a similar question about what are the stories that you're seeing in your countries or regions that aren't always ending up in mainstream media. Oz, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So most of the coverage when it comes to energy in South Africa looks at load shedding, which are the power cuts and generally the power utility Eskom. But there are a lot of other local stories that need to be told. So there's people in informal settlements in rural areas that are setting up their own smaller energy grids. These are set up by community leaders, not big companies. I mean, there's a lot of stories on the ground that need to be told. So one of the other ones that's really big is that there's communities in coastal towns that are fighting these big companies for extractivism. And they're pushing back on these companies, looking to harm the lands and spaces that these people live in. Clean energy is a really important story to tell, but the social justice aspect is something that needs more attention, and people's lives and livelihoods are something that need to be focused on. So, for example, Mpumalanga is where most of the coal and fossil fuels are in South Africa. And as we move towards cleaner energy, a lot of these communities are struggling as they're concerned about their job losses and what happens to their futures and livelihoods. And these are the stories we need to be telling, and how an energy transition can work and secure these livelihoods. I think these are the most important stories in South Africa for energy that need to be told.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, Varsha, what about you? India, South Asia perspective? Varsha, can you hear us?
So, yeah, Hannah, can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes, I was just asking what are sort of the major issues that you're seeing related to energy in India and South Asia that you think aren't maybe making mainstream media?
Okay, yeah. So when we hear about India's renewable energy journey, it's often the big headline stuff, massive solar parks, ambitious national targets. But when we dig a little deeper, there are important stories that don't always make the front page. One thing I have noticed is the real picture of jobs in the sector. We often hear about the creation of green jobs, especially in the areas like solar installations. That's true to some extent, but the data on the type, quality, and consistency of these jobs is still it's still quite murky. For example, specific roles like solar technicians aren't always clearly tracked in official surveys, which raises questions about job security and long-term sustainability. We are also building large scale solar and wind farms in remote areas, but the infrastructure to transmit that power, our grid, is still catching up. Even with rooftop solar in rural India, challenges remains. In one of my reports from Uttarakhand, I found that only a few homes in a village could install solar panels because the local transformer capacity was too low, and installation had to meet criteria like being near substations. So these infrastructure gaps are a major hurdle of scaling renewable equitability, and they are really make headlines. Another layer is the impact on local communities and the environment. Large renewable projects require land, which can lead to conflict with farmers or harm overlooked ecosystems like grasslands. We are also beginning to face growing issues of managing solar panel waste, some things that's not often discussed. So, but on a more hopeful note, I have come across inspiring community led initiatives, farmers using solar pumps, agrovoltaic setups where they grow crops or herbs under solar panels, or weavers powering their looms with solar energy. So these grassroots projects are truly empowering and bring clean energy, electricity to places that never had it and are often more locally sustainable and appropriate. So yes, while the big picture of India's renewable push is, we can say, exciting, it's if these underreported ground level stories about the job realities, infrastructure bottlenecks, powering rural communities, local impacts, and community innovations that give us a fuller and more nuanced understanding of the energy transition. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the focus on local communities comes through in both your answer and Oz. Matias, over to you. Same question, what you're seeing in Argentina and Latin America?
Well, I hate to sound repetitive, but I think that local stories are something that is not in mainstream agenda right now. I think energy transition is mainly covered as an economical phenomena. Maybe a little bit political if we add some of the Chinese inversions or the Chinese industries that are reaching Latin America, but actually there's not much about it. I think that the local conflicts on not only installing projects related with energy transition, such as solar panels or wind panels or hydropower projects, but also looking a little bit more in the supply chain of the materials needed for that energy transition, such as copper, such as lithium, that here in Argentina, but also in Chile and Bolivia, they are something that many people are talking about. It's something that we should talk about more. We should talk about with the people that live there and how the dynamic of their lives changes with these projects that are being installed so quickly. I think also something that is really important that we should be talking about and we should be covering. It's also what energy transition represents for such a diverse territory as Latin America is. We cannot talk about energy transition in Argentina and compare it with the Brazilian example, because they're so different in territory, in culture, in the way of living, and the government. So I think that having this contrast between countries, it's something that from an international perspective is an interesting topic to talk about. And well,
Yeah,
also
absolutely. Thank you. And I think this goes really nicely into one of our pre-submitted questions, which was, how can journalists effectively balance the technical aspects of renewable energy with storytelling techniques that engage the general public and convey the urgency of the just transition? I think, Varsha, you wanted to answer this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think we journalists play a critical role in translating government schemes, technical knowledge, and the science behind renewable energy into accessible language. Many people are still unfamiliar with terms like just transition. So it is very important to not only explain such concepts clearly, but to reinforce them through repeated relatable storytelling. As climate impacts like extreme heat and rising electricity bills become more visible, public interest in solutions like renewable energy is growing. So, this gives us an opportunity to frame these technical developments in a way that resonate personally. So the first step for me as a journalist is to really understand the technical aspects myself first, and only then we can simplify and communicate them effectively. So we must ask, what does this mean for the people, and how will it affect their lives, their communities, their livelihoods, and their future? Even in highly technical stories, anchoring the narratives in the lived experiences of individuals makes the story come alive. For example, in one of my reports from Jharkhand, I followed the life of a 16-year-old girl from a coal picking community. Her family, like millions who are informally dependent on the coal economy, is excluded from the just transition framework, telling her story of her hunger, lost opportunities, and resilience helped humanize the broader issue of energy transition. With these stories, it becomes easier to highlight the systematic gaps and the urgency of inclusive policy. Ultimately, the key is to find the human story within the technical details and use it to build a compelling narratives. We can bring both clarity and urgency to the conversation around the just transition. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and Matias, did you have anything to add here?
Yeah, well, it's basically in the same line. I would just say that when I think about stories relating with energy transition, I try um, to have the story and use the data for that story, and not the other way around. Uh, uh, it's often common to have a report or get access to a report and then think about the stories. I think we should do that, but also try to look for stories and use data from several reports. Um, so I try to be really synthetic, and well, as Varsha also try to use a lot of the data and the technical issues of these reports, but mainly I try to focus on the stories, give them the less numbers that I could, so they could understand what it means, what those number means. And the other thing that I would like to say is that well, this is something that I'm just trying and I'm just experimenting. I mainly write, but I'm trying to use to be creative and use other media resources such as photographs, such as video. Um, right now, I think that it's an incredibly accessible tool to use, and it's essential for this era. And for explaining these processes, I think video has a lot of impact on people, and I think we should be looking for that, for the impact in an emotional way, in a sensitive way, because many people remember these things only because it's something that impact your life, impact your give you an emotional response. So think about that when you're looking for a new story, or trying to use some data of a report.
Yeah, really good tips from both you and Varsha there. We also had an interesting question, speaking about audience engagement, about working with skeptical audiences. When faced with audiences resistant to decarbonization, how do you convey the stakes of continued dependence on fossil fuels? And I think, Oz, you wanted to take this one.
Yeah, so there's a lot of skepticism with decarbonization and getting rid of fossil fuels in South Africa. If I'm not mistaken, fossil fuels make up about 80% of South Africa's energy access. So there is massive concern when it comes to decarbonizing. What happens to our energy? We already have a strained grid. What about all those people who rely on those jobs? So the skepticism is valid, especially when it feels like an energy transition is being imposed on people and not with them. In the case of Komati in Mpumalanga, people were informed that, oh, this power station is being earmarked the for an energy transition, and it's being shut down for solar, and all those people's jobs were gone. And it's important to reframe. So instead of saying things like we need to decarbonize, we need to explain why these topics affect people, and that is from a financial perspective. So if we explain what extreme weather does to food prices or water access, or if you explain to people that if we don't decarbonize, we face carbon taxes from countries in Europe or the UK, and that means that jobs in mining towns will go, or other jobs in other sectors will go, whether we like it or not. Then people start to listen. So we need to connect decarbonization with economic survival and people's livelihoods, and that's how you get through to people. And it's also about just showing how fossil fuel dependence already costs us. So not only environmentally but economically as well. So I think equally important, we need to tell people about the health issues. So coal causes a lot of air pollution in Pumalanga, and this has widespread effects on people's health through this air pollution. So tell the stories of the health impacts and how people are being affected, and that's how you get the message across, and that's how you break down the skepticism on decarbonizing and why it's so important to decarbonize, and why we need to lessen our reliance on fossil fuels.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the other side of that, we also had a question about how journalists who are reporting on renewable energy are often worried about being labeled as activists or advocates for the cause. And how do you get around this? So, Matias, I think you wanted to take this one.
Yeah. Actually, in Argentina, we are also called communists and several other things. Right now, I think it's something common, and it's a harsh environment because we as journalists don't want to position ourselves as activists. I think one of the main keys I found for this is, first of all, a basic journalist rule, trying to talk to all the sources, even the ones that are against this, to have contrast. But also, I think what I do when I write these kind of stories, I try to think on the audiences that I'm talking to. So imagine that I'm doing a piece on inversion of, I don't know, financial inversions for renewables. So I'm talking to maybe a company man. So I, I'm also trying to understand their point of view on how this would affect them, how this would could be influenced, how they could be influenced by this. So I try to give them some tips so they understand that it's not I don't know, the good against the bad or something that simple, that it's a little bit more complex than that, and they could profit from that. If they're, I don't know, here in Argentina we have the development of Vaca Muerta, that it's a non-conventional gas and oil production, and it's really important, and it's like one of the most important energetic projects here in Argentina for the government and for the companies. So if I'm talking for workers that work in Vaca Muerta, that see a piece and they feel threatened by this, I could talk about health. I could talk about actually a lot of health issues. It's something really important for them. How they could readapt. What's the future for them if not this project? What are the options? If we give options and we give contrast in our stories, I think that people could understand that there's much more. Uh, Obviously, government, if they're negationists of climate change, or if they're publicly against this agenda, they will keep talking. But we're not talking to them. We're talking to the people that want to understand a little bit. And I think that it's worth it to give it a try and think about this. Think about the audience. Well, that's my main suggestion.
Yeah, I think a lot of what everyone's saying is really about meeting people where they're at with regards to our journalism. So I think that's overall a really good takeaway for all of us. Similarly, we've been talking about local communities a lot and how it's important to highlight their voices. And this was a question for you, Varsha, about how local communities have a role in shaping the narrative around renewable energy, and also how can journalists amplify their voices. We've been talking about how important it is that we do that, but what are some of your tips for actually getting out there and engaging with local communities in journalism?
Yes, I think I believe the true power of green energy lies in its ability to empower local communities and areas far from urban centers. Their lived experiences offer critical insights into the challenges and opportunities of this energy shift. These communities, especially those in remote and um, uh, marginalized areas, are often the first to feel the impact, both positive and negative, of renewable energy projects. From decentralized solar systems lighting up off-grid villages to solar-powered street lights, improving safety and quality of life in regions where electricity is scarce. These stories highlight how renewable energy can directly transform lives. So, for example, in hilly or tribal areas where power cuts can last weeks due to extreme weather, or but here solar energy provides an essential lifeline. Farmers too are like increasingly turning to solar power to irrigate their fields, while small rural processing units are benefiting from solar energy to power their operations. In a story, in Rajasthan, solar powered bus stops are even offering cooling spaces for the general public during heat waves. So further showing how renewables can provide solutions to the specific needs of the local community. These grassroots stories show that renewable energy is not just a top-down solution, but a way to empower local communities, especially those historically excluded from the reliable energy sources. And it is also very important to report on the hurdles these communities faces. Weak rural electricity infrastructure, for example, can impede the full potential of renewable energy in these areas. So we journalists play a crucial role in amplifying both the successes and challenges faced by these community. By sharing these stories, we can highlight the need for policy changes, infrastructure upgrades, and targeted government interventions to ensure that these communities are not left behind in the transition. So, in this time, this great energy shift is happening in our countries. It should allow citizens and communities to have a more significant role in decision making, ensuring a fairer distribution of both the cost and benefits of the energy transition. And we have this unique opportunity to elevate these voices, showcasing how local communities are using RE to improve their lives, what challenges they face, and how they are innovative solutions. Our stories can bridge the gap between technical policy discussions and the human experiences. This helps to build a more informed, supportive public and political will for a transition to make it fair and inclusive. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Getting back into a bit of the data, there was a question submitted, what do we do when the sources of data disagree? For instance, government data compared to Ember's data on progress toward energy targets. So Dave, I'll hand that one to you.
Yeah, it's trying to, I guess our job is trying to understand the real data. It's not very often that we really find governments reporting specifically the wrong thing. I think the biggest problem that we have is governments not reporting anything, and just the lack of transparency, data transparency in so many countries across the world is astounding. If you're trying to undergo like such a rapid transition, you need some really good quality data, up-to-date data out there to understand what's going on, and that really is lacking in so many ways. One thing that is always a problem is exactly how do you express that data. So making sure that you can demonstrate so much through a data point and then make that kind of almost manufacture that by itself, depending on all sorts of assumptions. So like so from our perspective, I think a lot of reasons why journalists trust us is they know we've been through a lot of checks and measures, and we try to present the data, the key data points in a really fair way. Other organizations don't, even governments don't do that, and that's certainly one of the key roles for journalists in this, not to take those data points at face value and to actually go into them. And like even Matias, when you're saying like, yeah, we don't want to be going into loads of data, you don't need to go into loads of data, but like most stories have at least like one data point in there, and to try to understand that one data point as much as you can is a really critical role, I believe, for journalists. One other thing, if I may, that's kind of moving on slightly from data back to what Matias was talking about and addressing a question from Lucy on the that had come through on the comments side, which is throughout that all of what we've been hearing so far is talking about the transition and decarbonisation, and with that, both of those words comes a lot of luggage where people have certain premonitions around those words. And for me, so much of the building this clean energy is a way to ensure our growth, to be building more energy for the energy that we need to be using as human beings in the first place. So to answer, like Lucy posted a question into the chat saying, how can we talk about energy transition when rural remote villages aren't connected to the grid? Well, for them, it's not a transition. For them, it's new energy. But even at the completely opposite end of the scale, which is you look at AI, and AI hasn't had, it's not a transition for them how you provide the electricity for them. That electricity hasn't been used for AI before. So even at the completely the opposite end of the extreme, you have that ways that you can ditch the word you can start talking about this without using the word transition and decarbonisation that are so loaded for so many people. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that, and thanks, Lucy, for that great question. I think we're kind of getting into the bit of the politics here, and there's some questions on that. So one journalist asked who or what is kind of holding back the clean energy transition. They mentioned the BRICS countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, also developed countries like the US, and how can journalists kind of cover this international story? Matias, I might bring this one to you, as you've covered UN climate conferences and biodiversity conferences, and you've done some of that international work.
Yeah. Well, I think that talking about like major political stories or internet or it's essential to put yourself put your country or the place that you're covering, in my case Argentina, in the international context. What role does it play on energy transition, or the region in general? I mean, Argentina in particular is not such a relevant player in developing solar panels like, I don't know, like China, but maybe in the whole region, as the report, the Ember report says, has another perspective. I think that actually I always try to focus on what does this international process influence in the political structures of our countries, on the political agenda that it has, and how it modifies also society. Because I think that something that it's really important and really difficult to do, especially covering events such as COP, such as UN events, is to connect this so far away process from the impacts that could go locally. So I think there is a bridge that we as journalists could build to do that. How come? Well, we have stories. We work in the territory, so we could link this to the decisions that are made in major political spaces such as UN or such as Congress, if you don't want to go so far away. Well, that would be my answer for that. I would also, Hannah, if I want to elaborate a little bit on what David said and what Lucy also said, because I think that what she's telling is really important. Like, there's places in Latin America, but in the whole world, that doesn't have energy at all, and I don't know if we could come up with an energy transition as we think about it, but I think that many stories could reflect the dispute between energy transition and conventional development. I just want to tell you one little story I wrote some months ago in the north of Argentina, in Chaco. I work with some communities that have off-grid solar panels because of a government program that it's ending right now with Javier Milei's government, and they are installing electrical cable on-grid installations, but fueled by gas. So actually, they're like going back in energy transition to conventional energy sources because of a political decision. And this complexity is really interesting to put it in a story, and to put it in a human story. Well, so Lucy, I just wanted to tell you about this because I thought it links a lot with your questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dave, do you have anything to add here? No? Okay. Then there's another question about politics. I think this one's for you, Oz, which is about opponents of clean energy, such as the current president of the United States, argue that these energies are too expensive, slow the economy's growth, and cost jobs. Are they right? And what are the real costs of these energies, meaning renewable energy?
So I think that narrative is increasingly outdated. The cost of solar and wind power have dropped dramatically. Solar is amongst the cheapest sources of electricity worldwide, as David mentioned earlier. Its uptake is massive. That's the same for South Africa. The cost of solar is just going down. The real challenge is maybe not the cost, but political will and grid infrastructure. So connecting all these renewable projects to the grid, that's the big challenge we face in South Africa. Clean energy can actually grow the economy. There are studies that show that renewables create more jobs per rand invested than fossil fuels do. And I think it's important to tell these stories. So get the experts out there, get their voices into the public space so that people can actually learn that these are out and these are a lot cheaper than what certain people are claiming they are. I mean, with biofuels, the picture is more complex. These can compete with food production or lead to deforestation if it's not properly regulated. So I think sustainability is key. But overall, the economic style, it shows that a clean transition is possible. It's just that the policy mix needs to be correct and the context matters. So it's really important to tell the stories using expert voices and getting this out in a way with the context that shows that solar is a lot cheaper than it was 5 years ago. It's a lot cheaper than it was a year ago. It's just a matter of how to get it onto the grid in a way that's sustainable and in a way that doesn't alienate people that rely on their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave, did you have anything to add on this one?
If we can we go back to the overall politics, which is, I guess there's two things that we see very clearly that that have been slowing the overall transition down. One is the fossil fuel industry, and that's been happening for a century. I guess the new one in town really has come from that ideologies place where that spills over from direct fossil fuel lobbying into ideology is sprouted, and quite how energy got brought into ideologies is quite incredible. And if you ever want to read more about the ideologies, go to Politico and Google how the far right politicized heat pumps in Germany. It almost brought down the German government talking around heat pumps. It's an absolutely insane story, and people have you see that, and that was written 1.5 years ago, and that was probably when people first, certainly in Europe, really came real to just how far that ideology had actually come, and a lot of it is because people don't like to be told what to do, that this is an imposition for people, and they're fighting against that. And one of like the key things is that how do you find a way to depoliticize all of this? That's the key thing that we're trying to do. We try to speak with the facts. That goes a little way to do it, but you got to find narratives around that to try to unpack that we're not just speaking on the other side from an ideology that's not necessarily rooted in facts, but we have our own ideologies as well, and that can only take you so far in these arguments.
Yeah, it's a good point. And speaking of, there was a question about sensitive or contentious forms of renewable energy. What should journalists bear in mind when covering things like nuclear? Oz, I think you wanted to answer this one.
I can make a quick start while Oz comes in. It flows very nicely on about the ideologies thing. It's like trying not to
absolutely it
ideologies. For me, so much about talking around the technologies is trying to talk around the niche in which it sits and talk about it in a factual way. So for wind and solar, they're the cheapest form of electricity. They're the quickest forms of electricity to deploy. They have issues with land with land use and where you put them and permitting. And there's other issues, of course there are. But all the all the fuels have their own limitations in that way, which is why you need that honest discussion on it. The niche for bioenergies, it really depends on where that fuel stock comes from. The first biggest mistake people fall into with bioenergies is saying it's zero carbon. It's not. It's got a life cycle emissions attached to bioenergy, and depending on how you get that feedstock, where it comes from, and really depends on how clean that is. And in some cases, it's worse than burning coal. So really, on bioenergy, it's understanding the feedstock. On nuclear, there's a safety issues, but really, it's a lot of it is understanding what's the actual niche for that, like what time scales does this apply to realistically. When is the first nuclear power plant you will be able to build in your country if you've never built one before? The small modular reactors and all the discussion around that, nothing's been fully commercialized yet. We're not going to get deployment at any scale this decade. It may be for next decade, but that you need that caveat in there to understand how that works through. And I think that it's interesting to also not to kind of make sure we don't get bought too much into the drinking the Kool-Aid on sort of new technologies unless we know they're through. So like, for example, hydrogen went through such a massive hype where now the whole, as Michael Lieber calls it, the hydrogen souffle is now deflating and people are getting real about what that actually is. And if we're kind of, I guess the last of the technologies to mention on this is probably carbon capture and storage, which is the context of, how quickly can you build this, but also who's funding it, because the advantage for wind and solar is it should be cheap electricity and energy to bring in. Carbon capture and storage doesn't bring in any new energy, it's just capturing that carbon. So who's paying to capture that carbon? Where's that money coming from? Because governments won't have explicitly have big piles of money to set aside to be bearing CO2 into the ground, when actually you could be getting the energy in total cheaper in the first place from renewables.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great points. And Oz, over to you.
Thanks for the save, Dave. The mute button was sabotaging me. So yeah, when it comes to covering more sensitive and contentious issues like nuclear, South Africa has a long history with nuclear, from the former president's secret deals to the current energy minister saying that there are new nuclear plants proposed. South Africa's one and only nuclear power station has regular maintenance needs, and it's constantly going down because it needs maintenance. I think it's important to be transparent, talk about the risks, but also what are the trade-offs. Nuclear is a polarizing topic which gets people riled up, but it's important to explain why it's being considered. Can it meet baseload requirements, or does it help to meet net zero targets? But I think journalists should be really mindful and not echo government spin or even PR uncritically. I think that's where it's important to talk to experts as well and analyze data. The very important question to ask is who benefits? Who benefits from these nuclear builds? Who bears the risks of them? Local communities being consulted, are environmental protection regulations met? And then we need to unpack the financing. Follow the money is always crucial here. So it's really a complex topic, but I think good reporting can help understand the nuance without either fueling fear or just making it all hyped up when it shouldn't be. So I think Dave's points on small modular reactors were important. They have different risk profiles and how long before they are realistically up and running. So it's important to interrogate the information we're being given and not just report, and we have to be critical about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the financing is a big piece that's coming up with multiple answers here. So we are almost at time. This has been a really great conversation, and thank you to those in the chat that have posted some interesting comments. We have one more pre-submitted question, which asks, what are some misconceptions about the energy transition in your country? For instance, in my country, many people believe renewable energy is not powerful enough to generate electricity for their houses. How do you beat this mis and disinformation? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I think if we want to kind of close on it with some final thoughts from everyone, Varsha, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think in my reporting experiences, I encounter with quite a few misconceptions when it comes to renewable energy. The one is the idea that we can't fully transition from coal to renewables, especially people in coal dependent areas often feel that it's impossible to shift to renewable sources. And honestly, that's partly true, at least for now. Coal still account for about 60 to 70% of India's total energy generation, but we are making significant progress, and with solar and wind power growing rapidly. People are concerned about the jobs. Coal provides livelihoods for millions, and they wonder if the renewable energy can offer the same. While it's true that some jobs in the coal sector may be lost, the renewable energy sector is creating millions of new jobs in areas like manufacturing, installations, and maintenance. Another surprising misconception I have heard that some employees in the electricity departments are not on board with the renewable energy because they are afraid of losing their jobs. This is understandable, but it's important to show that the renewable energy creates new roles and opportunities for them as well. There are also safety concerns when it comes to solar energy. A lot of people are worried about the touching solar panels in the sun, thinking that they might be electrocuted or burned. In reality, while solar panels do get hot, but they are completely safe to touch as long as you're not messing with the electrical parts. So lots of things like a lot of people ask what happens with solar at night or on cloudy days. Well, that's where things get interesting. If you are off grid, you can store extra solar power in batteries during the day and use it later when the sun's not out. And if you're on grid, you can still pull the power from the regular electricity lines when needed, and even send back any extra solar power you generate. Yes, so in India too, there are quite a few misconceptions. Some people think solar can't power a whole house, or that it won't work at night or during monsoons. Other believe switching from coals to renewables will cost jobs, especially in coal dependent regions. So I basically try to encounter these by sharing real stories from the ground, like farmers using solar pumps or small villages units running entirely on solar. So these examples show that the renewable energy is working, and it's already changing lives. Also explaining things simply, like how battery storage works on different and or the difference between the grid connected and off-grid systems, helps people see it's not just a dream, it's reality in many places already. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, to you, either answer to this question or more generally kind of closing thoughts?
The misconceptions is such an important part. There are so many misconceptions everywhere, and the lens that I love to think about it is that quite often they might have been true, those facts in the past, and they're not true now. So it's almost kind of like, how do you take the audience on a bit of a journey with that going through? In the case of like what Varsha says, like, can renewables replace coal? Well, in the case of the OECD, coal peaked in 2008, and coal generation across the whole of the OECD is now half of what it was in 2008, with a 1-to-1 increase in wind and solar. That's the scale that we've got to. So it's like, how do you pull out bits on that? The other way you take them on the journey is through the really impressive steps up in technology. So talk about battery, like, are there fire? There were fires. There aren't fires anymore. The technology has completely changed. That used to be an issue. It's not an issue anymore. Cobalt, nickel used to be in batteries. Almost all the grid storage, not the car batteries, but the grid storage batteries now do not have cobalt and nickel in them anymore. So it's like, take people on that journey of how the technology is developed. Heat pumps is such a controversial one. They used to become so inefficient in very cold weather, which is not what you really want from a heat pump. The refrigerants have got so much better within them now that they're able to operate down to kind of minus 15 degrees with and still have a high degree of efficiency built in. So that's the way that I think it's really constructive to deal with the misconceptions.
Yes, take people on a journey. I like that. Matias, over to you if you have any final thoughts or want to answer this question just to wrap up. Oh, you're still muted. Yeah.
Sorry, technical problems. I think that what Dave said respond to that question. Maybe for wrap up. Well, I would like to say that here, at least in Latin America, this is not such a developed topic, especially in oil-producing countries such as Argentina. So I believe that talking about energy transition also is talking about uh, the main problems about oil production. How come this is a better option than what we have now and what is being developed now? Because here in Latin America, as you know, there's a lot of development in oil production and gas production, non-conventional one. So maybe what I would tell you to look as journalists is to find these contradictions in the development of this kind of production and all that it comes with it, the infrastructure that it's getting old, that it has impacts in local communities and in general in the national economy. What does that mean for unstable economies such as the ones in Latin America? And how come energy transition could represent another option for development that I think that at least in my region is something that many countries are looking for. Many people are trying to understand. Well, that's what I would like to do, and thank you all to be here. It's really interesting to hear you all, and well, thank you.
Thanks, Matias. Oz, over to you for any last final comments before we wrap up.
Yeah, I know. I think it's all pretty much been covered. I don't think I have much else to add. I think it's just important for journalists to remember when covering these things. I think all these type of topics in energy, it's important to remember the so what. And I think that's a really important thing when you write is that tell the people why the story matters. Get down to the nitty gritty of it. Tell your audience why they're reading this. Keep that thread throughout. And I think it's just really crucial to remember that these big energy projects don't work in silos. They affect a whole bunch of people, and it's often the most vulnerable that get affected. And these stories need to be told. So I think that's the only last thoughts I have, which needs to be said from my side. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, awesome. Well, all right. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to our 4 speakers for spending this hour with us. As a reminder, you can head over to earthjournalism.net for more information about the next AMA we'll be holding likely in June. And you can also join our EJN group on our website. And just in general, peruse our resources and opportunities at any time. And again, just a plug for Ember's Global Electricity Review, which has so much great data and information for journalists if you're covering this issue. So definitely go check that out. If you'd like to rewatch this event at any time, it will be available on our YouTube channel in full in just a few hours. So thanks again for joining us. Happy Earth Month, and bye for now, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.